question 8 here. Question 8 reads, compile a timeline. Oh, yeah. I don't actually know anything about this question. It just looked interesting, and I'd like to learn about it, so we can learn about it together. Compile a timeline summarizing the most important matters surrounding the British currency crisis. Ensure that you answer the following. 1, what were the events leading up to the crisis? Policies, events, etc., that made the country susceptible? 2, what was the defining moment that precipitated the attack? 3, what happened in the aftermath of the crisis? And 4, how was the crisis resolved? What were the solutions? And it looks like our junior tutor has come up with a very in-depth answer here, which is exciting stuff. So they said that a currency crisis is a type of financial crisis and is often associated with a real economic crisis. Currency crises can be especially destructive to small open economies or bigger but not sufficiently stable ones. Governments often take on the role of fending off such attacks by satisfying the excess demand for a given currency using the country's own currency reserves or its foreign reserves. This is why a lot of Europe uses the euro and not individual currencies for each government. Since the early 1990s, there have been many cases of currency investors who have been caught off guard, which leads to runs on currencies and capital flight. A currency crisis is brought on by a decline in the value of a country's currency. This decline in value negatively affects an economy by creating instabilities in exchange rates, meaning that one unit of the currency no longer buys as much as it used to in another. To simplify the matter, we can say that crises develop as an interaction between investor expectations and what those expectations cause to happen. This is in part why Canada essentially pins the Canadian dollar to the US dollar and aims to keep it about, it's worth about 75 to 80% of that of the US dollar. So the causes of a currency crisis and the determination of how certain factors affect the overall value of a currency and its effect on investors. Basically, a currency crisis results from a decline in the value of a specific currency. The declines impact an economy negatively as it creates instability or fluctuations in the exchange rate. This is brought about by the interaction between investor expectations and the effects that these expectations occur thereafter in the UK. Okay. One of the common actions undertaken when a specific economy is experiencing or is projected to undergo a currency crisis, the country's central banks of the UK would shore up the value of the local currency through deposits made from their current foreign reserves. The difference that is covered is the pegged exchange rate and the actual value of the currency vis-a-vis another currency. When devaluation occurs, there is downward pressure on the currency that can only be counteracted by the interest rate. Increasing the interest rate requires a decrease of the money supply, which in turn triggers an increase in demand for currency. So if we remember our money market graph, we've got the quantity of money on the x-axis, and we've got the interest rate here. Our money demand slopes down, and our money supply slopes straight up as a line. So if we want to, and where money demand meets money supply is going to be our interest rate. So if we want to increase the interest rate, we're going to have to shift the money supply curve to the left. We'll call that MS prime. And assuming the money demand curve stays the same, the new interest rate will be higher than the old one. So increasing the interest rate requires the decrease of the money supply, which in turn triggers an increase in the demand for the currency. To create capital outflows, foreign reserves are sold off and payment would be made in the domestic currency, creating a locally denominated asset. Currency crises are caused by several underlying factors, ranging from central bank policies to pure speculation. The primary cause of a currency crisis is a central bank's failure to maintain a fixed rate peg to an often floating rate foreign currency. For example, George Soros famously bet that the British government wouldn't be able to defend the British pound's shadow peg with Germany's Deutschmark, since Britain had 3 times the inflation rate of Germany. Cool, I didn't know that. The consequences of currency crises are usually severe and typically involve output and employment losses, fall in real incomes of the population, deep contraction in investment, and capital flight. Also, the credibility of domestic economic policies is ruined. In some cases, a crisis can serve as an economic and political catharsis. Devaluation helps to temporarily restore competitiveness and improve a current account position. The crisis shock brings a new, reform-oriented government, and politicians may draw some lessons for the future. There are many solutions to a currency crisis in the UK, including many preventative measures that can be taken. The best solution to a currency crisis is avoiding them in the first place with preventative measures. Floating exchange rates tend to avoid currency crises by ensuring that the market is always setting the right price, as opposed to fixed exchange rates where central banks must fight the market. For example, Britain's fight against George Soros required the central bank to spend billions to defend its currency against speculators. Central banks avoid monetary policies in the UK that involve trading against the market unless it's necessary to prevent a broader crisis. For example, emerging market economies could have accepted the inevitability of currency outflows and reformed investment policies to attract foreign direct investment instead of trying to raise interest rates, which ended up costing banks millions to maintain. To end the debt crisis, we simply need to remove this power to create money as debt from the banks and return it to democratic power, such as the Bank of England. Then, instead of new money being lent into the economy, which increases our total debt, it can be spent. Thus, money could be used to increase public spending, reduce taxes, reduce the national debt, or even make payments directly to citizens. Except, an example of that would be like the stimulus checks we got when COVID started. Except for paying off the national debt, these methods all get money back to ordinary people and businesses rather than pumping it directly into the banks and hoping that the banks are then confident enough to lend it to us. If the money was used to cover existing government spending, it would mean that the government would not need to collect so much via tax. The government could then reduce taxes on the poor so that no one earning an income of less than, say, 12,000 euros would pay a penny of tax. So immediately raise the living standards of the poorest in society. So what they're saying there is sort of synonymous with a universal basic income or some sort of basic income. And what a basic income aims to do is reduce inequality between the poorest members of society and the rest of society. Once the new money makes its way into the hands of the public, it can be used to pay down the existing debts. The current crisis is unnecessary and easier to solve than it appears, but first we all need to understand more about where the money comes from and how it affects our lives. To make this happen, 9 positive money volunteers are working flat out to show how reforming the banking system could also deal with poverty, debt, inequality, and the environmental crisis. This activity is starting to spread across the country, which leads results to resolve the crisis. Interesting. If anybody's interested in that further, I'd recommend Googling it and giving a read up on it. I don't really have anything else to add outside of the little bit of commentary I had as I read through. Yeah. Move on to, I think, our last question, or maybe our second.